Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining In the Arena Live. This is our fourth week of doing this. This has gone by so quickly, but thank you so much for being here. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting with my colleague, Alex Brown, who I'm going to have introduce himself in just a moment. But really excited to have Alex here. This is his first time on. And today, we'll be talking about this week's episode, which was a conversation I had with Reid Hoffman, who recently released his book, Masters of Scale, also the name of his podcast, where he interviews some of the most successful and influential people in the world to understand their principles, often counterintuitive, about how to define their own success, how they get where they get. And what I loved most was that many of these principles that, while are amazing for entrepreneurs, are also principles any of us can use in our own lives. So, I like to think of it as, if you're the entrepreneur or the designer of your life, how can you use some of these principles that some of the most successful and influential business people in the world have used? So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Alex to introduce himself, and we're going to get rolling. We are seeing you all in the chat, and if you're watching us after this, all good. We are going to make sure that we have actions and learnings for you. And so please feel free to engage and share with us what you're coming up with. This is certainly about the community. Alex and I are by no means experts. We just want to start engaging people in some social and community learning. So go ahead, Alex, and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Totally on cue, Leah, right? I have my own lazy dog behind me, and I was just telling Leah beforehand, I've actually never heard her bark. She mostly just sleeps on the couch all day, and in true to form, there she is back there. But I am here, and I'm so excited to be here with Leah to talk about this podcast. I work on socially responsive leadership. What that means is I want leaders who are responsive to themselves, to the people that they work with, to the community around them, and also to the broader world. I think that this is a great podcast to be talking about because of Reid's commitment to social good, as a part of his entrepreneurship, but also in terms of expanding that access. So very, very excited to talk with you today, Leah, about that.
Love it. And Alex, you shared with me the other day that you're a Reid Hoffman nerd, so you're the perfect person to be sitting with me today.
Don't oversell. Yeah. Don't oversell.
You know a little bit. Cool. So we were talking about a few of the things that we took away from the episode, and if you didn't listen, we'll make sure that we share it here. But one of the first ones was around the fact that we heard a lot about, or I've heard a lot about, well-being. And Alex, I think you and I could probably both agree. This sentiment, no matter where you are, is that people are wanting to prioritize their well-being. They're feeling burnt out. And so there's a need for people to actually show up for themselves before they show up elsewhere. And so that was something that I brought up to Reid was, how do we think about well-being in a way that allows us to be better designers of our companies and also of our lives? And so I'm curious, for you, maybe what are some of your well-being practices, and what are your thoughts on how we do this to make better decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really struck by his marathon of sprints comment. That really resonated with me. I think I just had a really big sprint in my day job and definitely needed a rest afterwards. And so I really love that he said, really take that rest. Maybe don't go right on vacation and burn yourself out then on a busy vacation, which I totally, have tended to do in the past. So certainly taking time off has been a big one for me. Really making sure I'm scheduling in that time off. I'm actually coming up on a couple days off now. But, a couple other things are having a morning routine, like being able to wake up in the morning, journal, exercise. And the thing I'm working on right now is sleep. And Reid totally called that out too, like get enough sleep, be kind of emotionally regulated so that you can actually make quality decisions. And I couldn't agree more. What about you? What are some of your wellness practices, Leah?
Yeah, I resonate with you on that. I definitely get sleep. So I'm a like go to bed. I'm in bed by 8:00 most nights, like 8:30. But only because I wake up really early because I love my morning routine. So, making sure I'm exercising, and then, in whatever form that is. And then getting in writing, I try to do a few minutes of reading, and then walking my dog and all that good stuff. And at the same time, I know it's also sometimes really difficult to do that. So, I built a really like powerful morning routine a year ago, and I found in the last year that sometimes I can't do all six things I want to do, but I can do one. So I think that's also a big piece of this, is having some grace for yourself, so that you're not saying, beating yourself up over a morning routine that's supposed to be about your well-being, which is
For
definitely
sure.
something I've done. Yeah.
Yep, I totally relate to that. Self-compassion is key, if we don't have that self-compassion, then it can just become this other thing. It's like another thing of the boxes, the to-do list, versus being something really enjoyable. And I had this
Yeah.
coach, and she always used to say something along the lines of, wouldn't you rather be the person who does one or two things from your morning routine every day versus having to perfectly check off the list every single
Yeah.
day? And I just really appreciate that framing.
Oh, yeah, that list checking. I think you and I were just talking about how we keep nothing on our computers. It's all like on Post-its and everywhere. And I'm envisioning you having like 15 Post-its, but I too have just lists of things that I'm always trying to do. And it's like what gets, ingrained in you, but it doesn't actually work so well when it has to do with just living your life and taking care of yourself.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what do you said something, this topic came up around quality decisions,
Mhm.
and connecting to well-being. And, I'm something I noticed for myself with quality decisions is I tend to be a lot more reactive when I'm not taking care of myself. So if I'm not, really focused on my well-being, and just FYI, well-being and wellness are different. Wellness, well-being brings in elements of mental health, financial health, career health. So it is a different flavor than wellness, which is typically about physicality and the body. But I notice when I'm not taking care of my well being that I am more reactive. I'm more likely to get frustrated or angry with people around me, um, do little things that I normally wouldn't do, or make decisions I wouldn't make. And so I loved that you brought in the idea of making quality decisions, no matter what they're about, when it comes to your well being, if you take care of it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying there's a difference between wellness and well-being, because it's so true. And I found that to be true in my own life. And honestly, like coaching and therapy are really big. And unfortunately, we live in a society where not everyone has equal access to good mental health care. So I fully acknowledge that. And if you are able to access a therapist, I can only recommend it. I think that's been a key to me being able to stay sane the last year, like truly, especially with all the uncertainty that has come with this work from home period, suddenly being locked down in our homes. Like, how jarring, truly jarring. And so that's one thing that I've really had to lean into in the last year, is tending to my mental health first. Because totally, Leo, as you said, like when I don't tend to my mental health, when I'm not taking care of that part of my well-being, I might uh, just be really reactive. That's what I noticed, like interpersonally, kind of jumping into what I think the other person is thinking. That's a big one, versus just slowing down and trying to address what's actually happening. And I think that's just such a key thing in terms of being able to make quality decisions, is like how I'm showing up with the other people in the room. And
Yeah.
you know taking care of my mental health definitely supports that.
Yeah, and for those of you who are watching, if you're watching live or if you're watching us later, we'd love to hear what are some of the well-being practices that you've put into place or would like to put into place that could be meaningful. And one ad I toss in here is, if you haven't read Atomic Habits by James Clear, one of the most valuable things I learned is that building any new habit starts with just doing it for 2 minutes. So most of the time we try to create a habit and say, I'm going to go for a run for half an hour, 5 days a week. And by the second day, you're sitting on the couch, like eating popcorn or watching TV, and you're like, oh my God, I failed. And the idea is that if you want to get your brain to do something new, it has to be for a really easy, digestible amount of time. So if there is a well being practice that you have or you want to implement, try to do it for just 2 minutes. and see what happens. And what happens, of course, is you don't stop after 2 minutes, you keep going. And even if you do stop after 2 minutes, you get the reward that you actually did the thing. You get that kind of dopamine reward. Um, and Alex, I definitely want to. I know we're talking about Masters of Scale, but I also want to just acknowledge what you're talking about with mental health and just well-being in general, whatever that is. I always say, like, I've got a warm bench. I have, my therapist, I have a coach, I have a Kabbalah teacher, and I have like an energy healer and a medium. If I'm being totally real, that's my warm
I love
bench.
the realness.
So whatever your warm bench is great. But, those are some of the things that I do to fill my own cup. And again, like, I was really good with it for most of COVID, but I lost it probably when I made a couple of moves before coming back to New York. And I can see the serious difference between me when I'm actually taking care of myself and when I'm not. And then what that means for my work, for how I show up for people, for how I show up for myself, and the kind of person I am. And so that's why I think it was so meaningful to ask Reed about that first, because most people want to hear from Reed about business and work, when in reality, like, if we aren't taking care of ourselves, none of what comes out of us is as powerful as it could be if we were to actually shift that priority list.
Absolutely. And just to drive that point home, from my warm bench, from this coach that I've worked with, she always likes to say, like, you can't tire yourself out enough to help the other tired people at your job, right? Like if we're all just running on fumes, we're actually not going to be able to get quality things done. And focusing beyond our work world too, like with our friends, with our family members, with the people we really care about, the things that matter outside of work. I think that's so true too.
Yeah. And you brought up, like, the outside of work. You brought up one of the other great kind of points from the conversation with Reed, and what he talks about a lot in his work and also in his podcast is being what you called socially responsive, which I loved that phrase. And if you don't know Alex or Alex's background, this is a big part of his why. Like, he is thinking about and helping leaders, and also himself working to be socially responsive. And I loved this because, a lot of Reed is an incredibly successful person. We would say he's probably one of the most successful and influential people on the planet. And with his success, a lot of what he's done is tried to ensure, and what he's continuing to do is ensure, that some of that gets democratized, that people actually get to have the luck, that we talked about in their experience. And he also talks about other people who do this, like Mellody Hobson is one of my favorite stories. If you don't know her, she's the CEO of Ariel Investments. She's also George Lucas's wife, and she does a lot to contribute and support people of color in their own business endeavors, and in becoming, a larger percentage of the leaders that we have in the world. So Alex, I mean, I am not the expert in this, but, like, I'd love for you to talk about just we're taking care of ourselves. We are, doing that well-being routine for at least 2 minutes, and we're better people for the rest of the world. Like, what is being socially responsive really about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps maybe to talk about kind of my why for it, which is, for me, it's all about really developing leaders to choose courage over comfort consistently, and from a solid base of values. So yeah, being responsive to yourself, it looks like that those well-being practices, understanding your own story and owning your own story so that you can better show up for others. And then thinking about, what is your interpersonal impact, right? So for me, that's thinking about, sometimes maybe the impact of what I'm doing doesn't match up with my intent, and taking ownership of that, and then adjusting my behavior, because we're social beings. But then it goes bigger than that. And this is where I think, Reed's story is super interesting. And I'll try to connect back to that, which is, for myself, it really came down to understanding just the amount of privilege that I had in certain aspects of my identity, right? Being a white person, being a man, not having disabilities, and the ways in which being on this side of the coin has just given me advantages that I maybe wasn't even aware of. And then there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes with that, to be responsive back to other communities. And so that's why I loved, when Reed was talking about, entrepreneurs of color, or women entrepreneurs, or other groups who maybe have been underrepresented in some of the things that he's done to show up for those communities. And then thinking much bigger on a global scale. So go from that individual level, interpersonal, community level, and then thinking globally. What we're looking at is actually thinking about, how is your business impacting the world? So he's talking about social good being a part of that mission. And I think for me, it's like constantly carrying in that lens, that global lens, that like the business that I'm a leader in is having an impact on a global interconnected community. What do I actually want that impact to be? How can I find out what that is and make sure that it's for the better and not to, further screw things up, so to speak.
Yeah, I love I don't know why I loved the responsive versus responsible. It's something about responsive gives me like the feeling of action, but also some fluidity and space for shift. I'm just making that up, but is that true?
Yeah. So I think the reason I say socially responsive is so you're not reactive. We were just talking about not being reactive. It's being responsive to what's happening. And I think that means having a vision, having a set of values to guide you, knowing where you're going, but also responding along the way to things that just might not immediately be obvious to us at that interpersonal level, at that community level, at that global level, and pivoting and adjusting and thinking about how you can still get to that end vision, that end state, while being responsive on all those different levels.
Yeah, and there's this is reminding me of a book. There's an author who writes for the New York Times, and his name's David Brooks. He has you probably know who he is. And whether, he has a very specific set of beliefs, and whether you agree with those or not, he wrote a really interesting book called The Second Mountain. And the premise of The Second Mountain is that most of our lives, we spend the time climbing the first mountain. It's the mountain that we're all probably trying to climb that are sitting on this call today. So, success, whether it be, financial, marital, career, status, all of the things that if you were to list out the like material things in the world that you want, you're trying to get them. And that's what we spend most of our time doing. And the second mountain is all about, when you get there, then people often end up trying to climb the second mountain of, how do I give back? How do I contribute? How do I bring people along? And I can remember, one of Jim Carrey is like one of my favorite humans. He's had such an interesting journey. And if you spend some time researching him and listening to his most recent, interviews, he's been one of the most successful people, and he also really pulled back and had a lot of shifts. And he says, I wish everybody could have the experience of all the success basically of the first mountain, so they could see that it's actually not worth it. And the idea is that and the idea that I pulled from kind of listening to Reed, having read this book and listening to Jim Carrey, is the second mountain is what creates the more sustainable why. And that's what keeps us going. And when you have those moments in the first mountain of that like success, or that thing you put in front of yourself and said, oh, when I get this, I'll be happy, and you realize it actually never makes you happy, then what you really want to look for is something deeper and more meaningful. And that's really where, either being part of a community or contributing in some way is more powerful.
Yeah, for sure.
You say yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the second mountain. It makes me think of just like what's my bigger purpose, rather than, I want X position in a company or Y salary. Don't get me wrong, those things are important. but those are goals versus that bigger purpose. Like what do I want my contribution to be? And when you have that bigger purpose, when you get to that place of thinking about the second mountain, I think that's the kind of thing that, along with good well-being practices, it can really sustain you, give you some resilience, and give you that clear why that guides your work, but also helps you be more intentional with your actions.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
And I mean, Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, listen, that the why doesn't have to always be something big. It can just be something meaningful. Like
For sure.
big and meaningful are not the same word. So if they're not synonymous. So if you have a why that's, maybe a little smaller but still important, it doesn't really matter as long as it's what moves you ahead.
Totally. And I think like, connecting back to something Reed shared a little bit on that personal why piece. I love how he kind of went from his own story out to a bigger why. So his own story of, I had this access in my network, right? I had these kind of moments of luck of being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, being at the right institutions, and that propelled me. And then I was seeing that there are people who weren't, and so I decided to take some action, and creating network access, bringing different members of underrepresented groups into tech, and really take action to have a bigger and broader impact. And so I really loved and appreciated that part of what he was saying. Like, you can go from that personal experience, and especially in his case, with the amount of influence he has, go out and make a much bigger impact.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something very different. Like before we have this session, this is this live. We don't script any of this, but we do just talk about what we took away from the conversation. And I was talking to Alex, and I asked him about his why, just to understand a bit more. And it's there's a big difference when you're around people or working with people who have a meaningful why. And so as you're listening, if you're listening live now or listening later, just thinking about what your why is. And even if you don't have one, it's okay. Maybe it's that you're inspired by someone else's why, and that helps you get to yours. But, me listening to Alex's why yesterday, and then, talking about the idea of Reed, right? Having your own personal experience, your own personal story, and then recognizing that within that story lives your why is probably one of the most powerful ways to contribute to the world, because you've been somewhere that you want others to either never be, or you want to give them the ability to be there. When you're talking about like privilege and luck, and I know we talked about this a little bit, but luck and privilege, I had written down luck versus privilege, and then I was listening to you, and I'm like, luck is privilege, right? Like there's a different kind of relationship. They aren't opposing. It's that luck can happen when you're not privileged, but when you are privileged and luck happens, there's a different flavor to it. So I think it's also just acknowledging that for people who do have privilege, we have just as much, power and responsibility, or responsive ability, that's my new word, to go back and support people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We definitely have responsive ability and a responsibility to support people when we're in these positions of privilege, and regardless of what that is. And I love what you're saying about the kind of compounding effects there, because it's so true. And sometimes I think you're like almost like your ability to access the lucky, like, we're really talking about luck moments of like random meetings. It comes from privilege. Like, how am I plugged in to like the quote unquote right places, the networks with the know-how, the institutions that kind of set the tone for the broader world. And how am I getting the right knowledge and abilities and capabilities from those places? You don't get that without a leg up, or without some kind of just unearned advantage that kind of puts you ahead of the starting line. And so if you're one of those people like me, with a lot of aspects of your background where you're sort of ahead of the starting line, then it's important to put that arm out to the people and pull them alongside you.
I love that. And I mean, that's a big part of the reason I even started and continue this podcast, is to give people the knowledge that I wish I'd had at certain points in my life, but also the knowledge I want to continue to understand about the human experience, so that we can all live more meaningful, purposeful, and hopefully better, whatever that means for you, lives. And that takes me to our last point, which was we were talking about one of Reid's conversations he has with someone named Linda Rottenberg. And she's the CEO of a company called Endeavor, which actually helps other potential CEOs build communities and grow their businesses all over the world. And if you haven't heard Reid's podcast, highly suggest you listen. That would be an amazing episode to jump into. Is Linda Rottenberg or Mellody Hobson would be two of my recommendations. Or Reid's story. I'll add that one too. That one was really good. And there's a two-parter. But with Linda Rottenberg, she says that good ideas die in the shower. And this was it just stuck with me because I was like, number one, yes, I have my best ideas in the shower. Number two, I probably forget 90% of them. But number three, yeah, that is totally also where I convince myself not to do the thing that I want to do. And so even thinking about, this podcast and the work I'm doing, which is a big part of my why, I could have easily let that die in the shower or let the continuation of it with its new season die in the shower. But what Reid adds on to that is, I think what's really important is once you have that great idea and you say, all right, I'm going to move forward with it. Most of us, what we do is we go out and we say, all right, let me tell everybody about my idea. And all I'm waiting for is for Alex to tell me how amazing it is, how amazing I am, and how I'm going to be a success, right? But we miss so much because what we really should be asking is not what's great about my idea and give me a pat on the back. It's asking what's wrong with my idea. And that's what helps us sort of refine whatever idea we have. And again, I want to stress, it's not just about a new business idea. It's about ideas for things you want to do with your life, ideas for new routines, anything. A lot of times we let those die in the shower. And then a lot of other times we just don't go out and ask people what's wrong or what could go wrong.
Totally. Yeah. And I appreciated this I guess, push to go out and get that answer to what's wrong with my idea. And I'm someone who in the past was known a lot more for just offering that to people without being asked. I try now to.
Why can I kind of see that? I kind of see that. I appreciate it though.
I try to pair it with some solutions or ideas now, but I think it, it's a scary thing to a little bit to ask what's wrong with my idea. But it sharpens your thinking. And I loved hearing the story of just like how if Reid hadn't gone out and asked this question when he was thinking about LinkedIn, like we wouldn't have LinkedIn. It wouldn't be as successful as it is today. So that's the power of that idea. And the other thing I love that he said was this piece of bias to action. So having the courage just to go and try something, experiment and get data. So like, that goes back to this, do it for 2 minutes a day kind of habit building, right? Like just try something. How does it feel? How does it make you feel? Reflect on that, internalize that, and maybe try again tomorrow.
I think Alex, that's our action / homework for this session is like, maybe I'll give two options. If you already have your idea and you've asked what's wrong with it, go try it for 2 minutes, try something. Even if it's 2 minutes of just starting something and saying, I'm stopping right at 2, do it. And if you have an idea and you haven't asked, go ask one person that you trust, but also trust to be honest with you. What's wrong with my idea? And you can preface it if it's not like Alex, who loves to give that kind of feedback. If they're going to try to pat you on the back, you can tell them like, it's okay. I'm actually trying to figure this out for my own good. Like, please give me the stuff that you're afraid to give me. So either what's wrong with my idea or go try it for 2 minutes. Which of those two do you think you're going to try, Alex?
I think I need the bias to action. I love getting everyone's perspectives all the time. So bias to action. I'm going to try out something that I haven't tried yet.
Cool. I'm going to ask what's wrong with my idea. I think I've been doing a lot of action lately. So I'm ready to ask, where could I be refining that I'm not aware of, and just kind of out there being scrappy without maybe some support and some expertise. So that's mine. So that is that. We're at 30 minutes. It always goes by so fast, but thank you so much. We saw you all in the chat. We're looking and watching. Thank you for being here. And we will see you next week on Thursday. I'll be with our Actually, the final person that you haven't met yet, which is Michelle Kwan, talking about a conversation with Michelle Mi-jung Kim, who just released the book, The Wake Up, and runs a company called Awaken. She is incredible. So excited to see you all next week. And Alex, thank you for being here. You'll be on soon. Can't wait to have you back.
Thanks for having me, and I'm super excited for your conversation with MK next week about the Wake Up.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day.